Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, quite a doozy, one that I wasn't really expecting to end up being maybe one of the best books that I've ever read, but here we are. I am referring to a book that is about a school shooting and also motherhood. I am referring to We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, which was published in 2003. For those who don't know, Lionel Shriver is an American author who had published quite a bit of literature prior to We Need to Talk About Kevin. But the work that she's most known for is We Need to Talk About Kevin. Others have described it as a peak in her literary career where she didn't get the recognition that she deserves until, this book. And she's published some work since as well. I think she's also published a short story collection, which I might check out down the road. But I would definitely be interested in exploring more of her work after having read this book, because this is really good. And I have to see if anything else that she wrote is of similar quality. A pretty interesting author, but also a controversial author, as she is one of those authors who complains about woke culture and identity politics, and has also dragged down the trans community, and said that they're talking about transgender politics because it's a door to open for Marxism. It's clear that Lionel Shriver's politics are complete nonsense at times, and it is unfortunate given how great her writing is that she chooses to be such a complete loser in her personal life. Without further ado, let's talk about this book. I am going to recommend it, but I'm going to urge you, because I'm going to spoil a lot of things here, to go out and read it. This is a big, strong recommendation from me, so go read it and then come back, talk with me about this. Let's have a discussion about it. I'm going to do a summary, an analysis, and then we'll move on from there. So We Need to Talk About Kevin is told in the epistolary style. The character of Ava Kachadorian is writing in her journal after just early on in the story, she just admits that her son did a school shooting and is now in prison. She's writing, it's a journal style, but she's writing letters to what appears to be her ex-husband. And she goes into detail about their early relationship, what happens after Kevin is born, and everything that goes on from there. She talks about how Franklin, her husband, and her talked about having a child and how they met later in life in their 30s, whereas most people sometimes meet in their 20s. So they seem to be in a hurry to do things. And it seems like neither of them really want to have a child, but both of them just kind of decide to do it. Ava doesn't enjoy being pregnant, and when she finally does give birth to the child, she feels like she lost something in the process, and she feels indifferent towards the baby, which she names Kevin. The baby is Kevin doesn't latch on to her. There's no connection immediately. The baby constantly cries. It seems like a bad time all around, and it really seems like Kevin has more of an attachment to the baby than she does. Meanwhile, in the present moment, Ava is visiting Kevin in his youth prison. He admits that he doesn't really like Eva, like he hates her, and Eva also says, sometimes I don't like you either, which is a thing you don't expect to hear from either child or parent. There's a couple chapters where she's visiting Kevin in prison, and he seems to be making her life even more miserable. In fact, I don't really know why she's visiting him in prison, but I guess that's what parents do. As Ava is recollecting about baby Kevin, like how he's not normal, how he goes out of his way to make things worse for Eva, like crying all the time or learning in secret, because anytime Ava tries to teach Kevin something, he's not responsive to it, and then later he reveals, I actually already know that, proving that he's very intelligent, but like he seems to be doing a lot of things despite Eva. He's unwilling to get potty trained, and Eva and Franklin both make an effort to prevent him from watching violent movies. But Ava notices this was a mistake, that by hiding sex and violence from Kevin, like she made it seem special. But when he did go out and watch those, he kind of realized he was tricked, because there's nothing special. Ultimately, as Eva notes, there's nothing really there to feel like is special. It's just, if you're immune to violence like Kevin was, then what's there to get upset about? In addition to all other types of weird things, when Kevin gets older, he starts wearing clothes that are sizes smaller than he actually needs, like a statement on society or something. Kevin has a weird time in kindergarten, including seemingly coercing a young girl to scratch her at her skin because she has eczema and she starts bleeding, which this starts turning Ava and Franklin against each other, because Ava notes that Kevin has a lot of problems, but Franklin doesn't really want to see it. He's too invested in she's too invested in his he's too invested in being a parent, and so like he's willing to overlook this weird stuff in order to be a father to Kevin. Eventually, Celia is born. Ava wants to have another child, but Franklin does not, because Franklin views Ava as trying to escape Kevin. And Celia, the baby that they have, is actually a really, like, the complete opposite of Kevin, although Eva notes that she's very shy and timid and whatnot. Later on, Kevin has a sickness where Ava notes that maybe Kevin isn't so angry all the time, but he's rather sad about a lot of things. And again, around this time, as Kevin turns into a teenager, she notes that Franklin and her missed a lot of signs about what was going on with Kevin and what may have eventually led to his shooting. As Celia grows up, one bad thing that happens to her, she loses an eye, which due to chemicals in the bathroom that Ava might have left out, although Ava believes that this is Kevin's fault once again, although she doesn't have any proof, and Franklin is deeply upset when Ava suggests that Kevin might be to blame. After a series of incidents, Franklin and Ava realize that they are no longer able to communicate, especially about Kevin, and so they decide to get a divorce. And Kevin overhears this, and it seems to break something in him that causes him to eventually do the school shooting. And indeed, he does kill several students. And when Eva sees this, like she's completely baffled and very saddened. But then she gets home and discovers that Kevin has also killed Franklin and Celia, and it utterly destroys her. And it's one of the hardest moments to read in this story. And as the story comes to an end, Kevin is set to be transferred to an adult prison. He has a couple years left on his sentence. He only got 7 years because he did this at a very certain moment. And Eva notes that she's just really tired. She doesn't have the energy to fight Kevin anymore. And she also appears to be forgiving because Kevin is she seems to have a spot for Kevin when he finally does get out of prison in her home. In terms of analysis, where do I start with this story? Let me just say that this is probably one of the best stories that I've ever read for this channel. Maybe one of the best stories that I've read in the past 10 years, I would say. This feels really special, and like the emotional impact that this had on me while I was reading is hard to beat. I'm very surprised that I enjoyed this so much, especially given the subject matter. Like it could have been very like easily been one of the worst because it was so focused on violence. But Shriver does such a great job of mixing emotion with great characterization, and the themes that she works with, she really knocks out of the park. So like one of the things that she does really well is characterization. So there's like three main characters that Shriver really writes about in this story. And one of them, Franklin, like she writes particularly well, but Franklin isn't really the focus of the story, so I feel like he's left out on the wayside. Like Franklin is described as a conservative Republican, which feels very important, and I'll talk about later. Like he's eager to be a father, really invested in it, often like helping out Kevin and doing things with Kevin for his own sake rather than Kevin's sake. And I feel like, as is described by the story, like Kevin can see through that, and it helps him manipulate Franklin even further. Like like Kevin begins playing a part rather than being an actual son. And I think it also makes Kevin mad because like Franklin isn't being real with him. He's trying to be the goody father, which Kevin wants, like the actual father, not someone who's merely playing a part. And Franklin is incredibly protective of Kevin. So much so that when anyone comes around and says, Kevin did this terrible thing, Franklin can't see it. Like Franklin's like, oh, I will talk to my son, and then he talks to him and is like, and he uses kid gloves with him, and Kevin can easily manipulate him. So Franklin either is unable to see all the bad stuff about Kevin, or simply refuses to see it, because to do so would deny him his opportunity to be that conservative father and contribute to that sort of American pie ideology, or the American dream that he so is heavily invested in. And then there's also Ava. She's self-involved and impatient. When I first started reading, I was like, wow, this woman is arrogant. Maybe that's why her son killed a bunch of people, is because she's so self-involved she couldn't see anything about Kevin. But as the story goes on, we peel more layers off of Ava. She seems to be lonely and isolated, and she had these grand notions about being a parent, about being a mother, that weren't able to be met. Like she thought it was going to be somewhat easy, but it ended up being quite difficult. And I think she also she says she doesn't like Americans, but she's also an American, and she frequently travels to Europe, I think because it's difficult for her to be in one place. And as we learn more and more, it becomes clear that maybe she wasn't meant to be a mother. And maybe also she's in a bad marriage, because Franklin and Ava, although they do love each other, they don't see eye to eye. There's terrible communication between them, which Kevin later exploits. And it seems like they're together simply because of the American dream. You have to pair up and have a child. And that, as Shriver notes, that's disastrous. You shouldn't just stay together for the kids. This is a somewhat toxic relationship, and it's only gonna lead to Kevin growing up in a weird household. And then this brings me to Kevin, who is manipulative and nihilistic. I think he gets a sense that there's nothing. There's nothing to care about. There's no one who you should rely on. Everything in the world is awful. He's intelligent, and maybe that's why he sees that. He's constantly focusing on school shootings and the worst that society has to offer. He's manipulating his father. And he also seems to be obsessed with his mother and also loving to his mother, like maybe that's his favorite parent. But he also seems to be constantly disappointed by his mother, who seems to be just like everyone else. And, it's like, don't meet your heroes because you're bound to realize that they're just mortals like everyone else. But underneath everything else, as a teacher notes and as Ava notes multiple times, Kevin is sad. Like he puts up this angry, kind of jaded front, but he's also like, there's something going on underneath. Allow me to read you a quote from this. I had thought that dominant emotional tone of his, so extravagant from birth, was immutable. Call it rage or resentment, it was only a matter of degree. But underneath the levels of fury, I was astonished to discover lay a carpet of despair. He wasn't mad, he was sad. And it's very interesting that Ava notes this about Kevin when he becomes sick, like when he can no longer put up that front or that illusion of anger, like she sees the mask beneath. And also Dana Rocco, one of his teachers, notes that, and perhaps it's because when he becomes known like that, he becomes angry, and that's why he chose to kill Dana. And so, like for me, like what I get from reading this is that a lot of people have failed Kevin at every single level. Like no one noticed that he was suffering, that there was something beneath the surface. There was something like that he needed help with, like maybe therapy or a doctor or something like that. Someone to take him aside and say, let's talk about this. Let's address what's going on with you. Not his parents. They didn't really have the tools to deal with that. Not his school. Like that's not what school is for in American society, and not even the doctors. Like they just kind of glossed over that with him. Although they were very willing to prescribe him Prozac because that seems like a quick fix. Like yes, drugs in society, like mental health drugs are important, but they shouldn't just be thrown at someone as a cure-all for everything. Not to say that they aren't important though, but like that by itself is not enough to redeem Kevin, which I do feel the story tries to do. Like I feel like Shriver tries to redeem Kevin by making him look like a sad boy, or as my friend Bevan says, like a baby. Like he's ultimately suffering inside, and he's still a child, but that ignores everything that has happened in this story. He murdered a bunch of students. He regularly tried to hurt so many people. Like the story paints it as like, oh, did he really do this? No, like it's clear that he very well did this. Like he's a terrible monster of a child, and who is becoming a terrible monster of a man. And the story wants you to feel sad for him, but no, he ended up killing a whole bunch of school children and a teacher who actually cared about him. And then even before that, like he killed his sister, who he viewed as weak and sniveling, and she had to go, and his own father. Like doing that makes you impossible to be redeemed. And maybe that's one of Shriver's few problems in this story, is that she's trying to redeem someone who she paints as the worst in humanity. Shriver also talks about motherhood and parenthood in this story. Ava and Franklin both have mixed feelings about being parents, but they both do decide to be parents, maybe for different reasons. Ava deciding that she doesn't want to lose Franklin, but if she does lose him, she'll have a child to make up for it, much like her own mother. And you can see the weird sort of reasoning behind that. And Franklin is a Republican conservative, and I believe he thinks having a child is contributing to the American dream, and maybe he doesn't want a child for the child's sake. He wants it more for himself and for continuing this conservative ideology. And so both of them really shouldn't be parents in this case. But Ava's struggle with Kevin is exemplified by the problems that we typically think of in motherhood. Like with Ava, she thought that things would be immediate and that she would like form a bond with Kevin and it wouldn't require a lot of work. But as it turns out, motherhood requires a lot of work. There's a good quote again that I would like to read to you from this. "I'd anticipated mopping up vomit, baking Christmas cookies. I couldn't have expected Kevin's look dared me. I couldn't have expected that simply forming an attachment to you," I phrased as diplomatically as I knew how, "would be so much work. I took a breath. I thought that part came for free." And there you see Ava's real feelings about motherhood. Like she thought this would be easy, and it turned out to be quite a struggle. And maybe at that point she just simply gave up, or she put in less effort, because to put in a whole effort, like she wouldn't really know what she was going to get out of it. And that exemplifies maybe part of why Kevin grew up so dysfunctional, is because maybe he didn't have the best parents that he could have had. And I think what Shriver might be getting at is that, motherhood and parenthood in general, it's a very difficult and challenging process, and not everyone can be a parent. Not necessarily arguing that not everyone should be, or that we should put controls on it or anything like that, but that some people just shouldn't be parents, that if they do become parents, they're just contributing to a traumatic generation down the road. Compare and contrast with Celia in this story, a wonderful character whom Ava has an easier time with, maybe because Celia isn't as much work. Like she's very timid and shy, and like she's afraid of everything, so Ava doesn't really have a lot to do. And Kevin is a bit disappointed, I think, because like he can't interact with her in the same way that he can fake the relationship with Kevin. And Celia, like I think she's just more representative, that although Ava can be a parent, she can only be a parent when there's less effort required. And so, yeah, I really like what Shriver seems to be saying here. Another great element of this story is how Lionel Shriver seems to be creating a mirror, or showing a mirror to society, reflecting all of the ill and terrible stuff that goes on in society, and saying, like, is this who we are? Is this what American society is? Because again, we have this society that glorifies parenthood, but not everyone can necessarily be a parent. Shriver mentions Reagan and Republicanism pretty frequently. How Reagan was like obsessed with doing coups and had a very violent administration, and even the Republicans are very pro-gun and pro-sanctity of life, even though they're also pro-death penalty. And there's a massive focus on guns at times, and Shriver even mentions a lot of school shootings in this story, or even like mass shootings in general, where either Kevin or Ava be sure to mention it. Like it's mentioned in the lead up to what Kevin does, and even afterwards. They talk about Columbine and all of the shootings that have happened since then, as of 2001. And it's very fascinating that the story leads into 2001. Because it talks about like Bush v. Gore and all the problems that came with that. And we can also surmise like, 9/11 is about to happen. And it really seems like Shriver is saying, look at all this spectacle that is happening in society. American society sure does love a spectacle. Like Kevin, when he's talking to the media, he's like, people sure do love watching their television, and I gave them something to watch. And so it really seems like Shriver is saying, we created this hell that we live in. Like we created this society that values spectacle and like is obsessed with guns and violence, and is committed to doing violence so much that it won't stop any of the shootings that happen in school. And so we are responsible for this. There's another good quote that I would like to read to you. "You see," I proceeded, "by the time he was 11 or 12, this was all too late. The no-gun rules, the computer codes, children live in the same world we do. To kid ourselves that we can shelter them from it isn't just naive, it's vanity. We want to be able to tell ourselves what good parents we are, that we are doing our best. If I had to do it all over again, I'd let Kevin play with whatever he wanted. And I find this very fascinating because Ava, when she's in court, she's talking about this, she admits that, like, sure, she tried to shield Kevin from, the hard stuff, like R-rated movies and video games and whatnot, and do parental locks on websites and whatnot. But, they live in the same society. They are seeing the same things that the grown-ups are seeing, and the spectacle that grown-ups are seeing. Like, Kevin watches the news right alongside them. And so he knows what society values. And so for someone who's as dysfunctional as Kevin, he knows, shootings are what matters most. If I want to send my message, I can do it in the form of a school shooting. And it's fascinating that, like, in the years since 2003, when Shriver wrote this, school shootings have only amplified. And recently we had the Uvalde mass shooting and the several mass shootings that took place after Uvalde that didn't get as much attention. And you can see this spectacle and what Shriver might be warning, like, we are contributing to this in our society. American society is so downfallen and might be like a shattered empire at this point, that its young are killing each other because there's no guidance, because this is all there seems to be. And it's really damning of American society. I've never read something that is more damning than this, more utterly, like, nihilistic and sad in nature. So I have to give Shriver, like, a lot of credit for, like, this theme that they're working with and how they were able to, turn the mirror back and say, what the fuck? A lot of this story is aimed at asking the question of why Kevin did this. Why would anyone kill so many people, even people who were supposedly so close to them? Like, there's a lot of different explanations, like people were bullied, or Kevin was jealous of these people, or he wanted to save them from something, or something like that. Like, he even tells the news people, like, oh, he was just creating a spectacle for society, and there's a lack of accountability in America, which he kind of stole from his mother, and she even notes that. And so ultimately, like, it doesn't really seem like there's a good answer for what Kevin did. Like, even at the end of the story, Ava says, why did you do this? And he says, I really don't know anymore. And I think at that point, the question becomes, does it even matter why he did what he did? It does, as Ava notes, like, it won't bring Franklin back if she has an answer. It won't bring Celia back if she suddenly understands her son. What matters is nothing. Like, none of this matters. What matters is it happened, and it continues to happen, and it continues to happen, and it continues to happen, and people continue to die, and people continue to suffer, and people continue to die. And it's so incredibly sad, and it's like, as a society, we could very easily stop this, as I noted before. But the question isn't why people do this. We shouldn't make a point of saying this person was bullied or this person, didn't have a great upbringing, because we're missing the point that it's happening. We're pointing out individuals when we should be pointing out, the larger society and the losses that we've encountered in it. And I really like that question that Shriver poses. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, we want to find out the why, but maybe sometimes there is no why. And even if we find out the answer, it's not good enough, because it's going to continue to happen until maybe we're all dead. There are several other elements that I really love about this story, and also find problematic. There's great writing. Like, this is some of the best writing that I've ever encountered. Several chapters where, like, Ava is talking about her relationship with Kevin are really superior, and even the entire section where she describes what Kevin did in school is heartbreaking and frustrating and beautifully sad in nature. Some of the best writing that I've ever encountered. And again, this writing also feels timely because of Uvalde, and how, even though it was written in 2003, 20 years ago, like, this is still relevant. Like, the message here is that we are responsible for all of this in the wake of Uvalde, and how we need to, change as a society, or this is going to continue. Like, it feels like a message that needs to be heard and needs to be internalized. Otherwise, bad things are going to continue to happen. However, the story does feel pretty repetitive at times. She seems to talk about the same shootings over and over and over, Ava in this story, but also Lionel Shriver. Like maybe that's because there's an obsession there, but also like it seems like she's reiterating the same point. Like maybe the story could have been a bit shorter than it was, because sometimes it feels like Shriver has nothing new to say, and it's just, passing time until they get to the next chapter that they're working on. But again, like that, by focusing on the shootings, you really draw awareness of this enormous problem. And another big issue with this is it does feel vaguely racist and homophobic. Some of the terminology that Shriver uses, especially having Kevin say racist things. Like, we already know Kevin is bad. Why do you have to have him say racist things too? Like, especially when Kevin isn't really racist at all. And like, it really feels like based on what I know about Shriver, this is stuff that she believes. And she uses the hard, like, fag pretty several times throughout this story, really seeming not to like people who are gay. Maybe I'm being guided by what I know about her, but this felt vaguely hostile towards the LGBT community for some reason, and I don't quite know why. That's not what this story is about, or like that wasn't the focus of the story. But I guess some of Shriver's like personal, politics entered into this story, and it became somewhat problematic at that point. But it's not enough to sink the story. I just felt the need to point it out and note, when authors are being terrible people, we have to address that. Anyway, those are my thoughts on We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver, one of the best books that I have ever read. And I have to do a shout out to Bevan, my friend Bevan. This is one of her recommendations, and I'm honestly very surprised that I loved it so much, because I had read some of her work before. The Shadow King, which was pretty good, as well as Tokyo UNS Station, which I thought was fine, but it left me wanting more ultimately. Like, I felt like I needed more out of the stories. Like, I wanted something that was going to really, like, make me feel good, like make me really enjoy reading it, which the Shadow King kind of did. Beautiful Country also did, but that was really a book club read. And so, like, I really wanted something more, and that's what this is. Like, this is on the same level as Stoner by John Williams, a book that I absolutely love, and I felt like I got the same like feeling from that book. So I definitely recommend this to you out there, and I thank Bevan for recommending such a solid book. So yeah, I definitely recommend that you go read it. Maybe find a library copy to deal with Shriver's problematic politics and weird anti-trans statements as well. If you read this story before, or you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about We Need to Talk About Kevin, as well as mass shootings. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this book if they don't already know it. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and Kevin-y travels. Farewell.